Hey, 42 here. In the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean lies a speck of land barely visible on the world map. Today, it's known as Tromelin Island, but for a long time, it was simply called Sand Island. This tiny flat islet, surrounded by coral reefs and battered by the relentless ocean, is a rather unremarkable place. The sort of sand-spitter savvy sailor would sail straight past without a single thought. But there's nothing unremarkable about this island, because it is home to one of the most remarkable tales in all of human history. In the 18th century, the Indian Ocean was a bustling theatre of naval routes, colonial ambitions, and the dark trade in human lives. Amidst this global scramble, the island of Mauritius, then known as Ile-de-France, emerged as a pivotal outpost for the French in their Indian Ocean interests. Amidst this backdrop, in 1761, Le Utile, a ship belonging to the French East India Company, embarked on a secretive and unlawful mission. It set sail from Madagascar, under the canvas of stars, heavily laden with a valuable cargo. It wasn't spices, textiles, or gold, but human lives, Malagasy slaves, natives of Madagascar. Approximately 160 Malagasy men, women, and children were on board, bound for the slave markets of Mauritius. The trade in enslaved people was a lucrative business, despite rapidly growing ethical and legal constraints against it. Jean de Lafargue, the captain of l'Utile, was driven by profit, ignoring the colonial authorities' prohibition against such a trade. As l'Utile navigated the treacherous waters of the Indian Ocean, it approached the small, uninhabited Île de Sable, Sand Island in English, but the tale I'm about to tell has bestowed this island with a new name, Tromelin Island. You'll soon find out why. Despite the island being only 1 mile long by half a mile wide, it still caused mayhem as it appeared on the horizon. The captain had 2 navigational charts of the area. The only problem was, they both contradicted each other, and they were both completely wrong. This, paired with inclement weather, caused the ship to steer the wrong course, and on the night of the 31st of July, 1761, the Utile struck the coral reefs surrounding Tromelin Island. The hull shattered, and within minutes the sea claimed many lives, mostly those of the slaves trapped in the cargo hold. Displate is a platform for artists with thousands of creators from all across the globe sharing their unique designs, paintings, and illustrations on metal canvas. There are over 2 million artworks available in the Displate catalogue. Discover new, original art, or choose from officially licensed designs from the likes of Star Wars, Marvel, Elden Ring, and many other iconic brands and franchises. Displate is launching a new product line called Displate Texture. These premium print finishes will be available without limitations in a vast selection of pop culture metal posters. I chose a few displates from the texture range, and they look incredible. Just look at the beautiful embossing and texture on this Star Wars print. It's really nice. And mounting them was shockingly easy. Each print took about 30 seconds to mount, and I'm not even exaggerating. You simply clean your wall, stick the protective leaf on, then stick the magnet on, then position the print how you like. I'm super happy with how my displays look, and I love that the texture shows them off in a different light depending on which angle you look at them. Go to www.displate.com/42 or use my code 42 to access my discount. If you get 1 to 2 displates, you'll get 27% off. If you get over 3 displates, you'll get 37% off. It's available for 1 week only, so don't miss out. All metal posters from Displate are printed in the EU and should arrive in about 4 to 5 business days. A big thanks to Displate for sponsoring this video. The dawn following the shipwreck revealed a desolate scene. The survivors, a mix of French crew members and Malagasy slaves, stood amidst the wreckage on a sliver of land in the middle of the Indian Ocean, their futures now as uncertain as the horizon that stretched endlessly around them. Leadership fell to the ship's first officer, Barthélemy Castellan du Vernet, as Captain de Lafargue had succumbed to a mental breakdown under the weight of the tragedy. Castellan rallied the survivors to salvage what they could from the wreckage. They created a stockpile of materials that would prove vital in the coming months. Amongst the debris, they found barrels of food, tools, and pieces of timber. The most pertinent use of those materials was constructing rough shelters. The island offered no natural protection against the elements, a flat, barren landscape scorched by relentless sun by day and chilled by winds at night. 2 camp areas were established, one for the slaves and another, on the other side of the island, for the crew. Castellan also built a forge and an oven with materials recovered from the wreck. The island offered no fresh water, but the islanders soon sorted that with a Herculean group effort. Over the next 3 days, they dug an impressive 5-meter deep well. But then, the hunger set in. The initial rations salvaged from the ship were all but consumed within a few days, and the island's barren landscape wasn't exactly Mother Nature's pantry. The castaways turned to the sea, where they found fish and turtles, and to the sky, where birds provided some sustenance. These efforts were not without their challenges. Fishing required skill and patience, and catching birds was no easy task on an island with little cover for stalking prey. Yet, necessity drove innovation, and the survivors adapted their methods, crafting makeshift fishing gear from the wreckage and devising new traps to catch birds. Before long, Castellan and other crew members began the construction of a boat using timber from the wreck. In a little over a month, they had completed it, and they named her Providence. On the 27th of September, 2 months after arriving on the island, the jerry-rigged Providence set sail. On board were 122 men, all French crew members and officers. Not a single slave was permitted on board. And so the Providence party pissed off, leaving 60 slaves behind. Before leaving, they did promise to return to rescue them, but as their captors disappeared over the horizon, I can only imagine that the Malagasys must have felt about as worthless as it's possible to feel. After 4 days at sea, the crew aboard Providence reached Madagascar. Then they continued on to Foul Point, where an unknown number of them died from tropical diseases. Eventually, the remaining crew reached Mauritius, returning to civilization. To be fair to them, they did ask the port authorities to send a vessel to go to Tromelin to rescue the slaves that they left behind, but their request was instantly denied. In fact, over the following years, members of the rescue party would repeatedly ask for salvation for the slaves, but time and time again, those in power refused to lift a finger. And that's the way it stayed for 15 years. The plight of the Tromelin Island castaways remained a distant echo in the corridors of power in the French colony of Mauritius and back in France. Quite simply, the machinations of the Empire and European politics overshadowed the plight of marooned slaves. France had recently come out of the 7 Years' War against Britain and Prussia, and the French East India Company, the Empire's main machinery of trade, went bankrupt and was dissolved shortly afterwards in 1769. So yeah, it's fair to say that the French shit was hitting the fan. The rescue of a few lost slaves was quite simply at the very bottom of the to-do list. It's not like nobody knew they were there. Their abandonment and lack of rescue, for what was now over a decade, was occasionally talked about in French newspapers. It's just that people simply didn't care enough. This was a time when society was still brutally divided into classes, and to most people, a bunch of lost Malagasy slaves were about as lowly as they came. Having said that, there were actually 2 rescue missions in 1773, but they were both small in scale, and they both failed miserably. In fact, the second attempt failed so spectacularly that one of the crew ended up getting marooned with the slaves on the island. Once on the island, he built a raft and loaded it with 3 Malagasy men and 3 women. But they all ended up getting lost and probably died at sea. So yeah, basically the second rescue mission ended up killing 6 slaves and rescuing 0. Great job. However, back in France, the relentless advocacy of Barthélemy Castellan du Vernet, the first officer of L'Utile, gradually began to pierce the veil of neglect. Castellan, haunted by the memories of those he left behind and bound by a promise of return, embarked on a tireless campaign to orchestrate a rescue mission. For years, Castellan's efforts were met with indifference. The logistical challenges of mounting a rescue operation to such a remote and perilous location had proved too great, as the first 2 rescue missions had shown. However, Castellan's persistent lobbying, supported by a few sympathetic ears within the naval and colonial administration, slowly began to yield results. Furthermore, the attitude towards slavery was starting to shift to be more sympathetic within the echelons of high French society, so public pressure was steadily mounting. Eventually, Castellan's campaigning paid off. Jacques-Marie Boudon de la Tromelin, a captain in the French Navy, was finally persuaded of the necessity of the mission after sympathizing with the plight of the slaves. Tromelin was able to secure the necessary funds and resources. In November 1776, after 15 years of isolation for the survivors of Tromelin Island, La Dauphine set sail under Tromelin's command. Tromelin's navigational skill and his crew's resolve were put to the test as they neared the island, contending with the same hazardous reefs that had claimed Lutil 15 years ago. But they finally made it. Upon their arrival, they found a small holdout of human life. The survivors were now reduced to a mere 7 women and an 8-month-old infant. They were fragile, but alive and well, and dressed in garments they had crafted entirely from bird feathers. The rescue party were surprised to find a fire still lit. This same fire had been lit 15 years ago upon their arrival, and it had not stopped burning for a single day in all of that time. How? After all, there was not a single tree on the island. Well, there was a significant amount of wood left over from the wreckage of Lutil, and the survivors occasionally topped it up with driftwood. After bringing the slaves home and declaring them free women, no longer under the shackles of French slavery, yeah, I'm pretty sure they'd earned it, Sand Island was officially renamed to Tromelin Island, after Captain Tromelin, who led the rescue mission. The tale of survival on Tromelin Island lingered like a ghost story, largely untold and relegated to the footnotes of history, until a renewed interest emerged in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Archaeologists and historians, with a desire to uncover what really happened during those 15 years on the island, set off to find out for themselves. Max Giroux, a former French naval officer turned archaeologist, and fellow archaeologist, Thomas Ramon, embarked on what they named Expedition Forgotten Slaves. It was actually a series of expeditions. Over several years, they meticulously excavated the site, uncovering the incredible artifacts that told a story of survival against all odds. Fortunately for them, since the castaways had left, over 2 centuries ago, a 30-centimetre layer of white sand had accumulated on the island, largely preserving every detail of the castaways' camp. They found remains of extensive shelters made from coral and a makeshift brick called beach rock. Beach rock is a kind of natural cement made from coral crushed into a powder, which is mixed with water and then dried in the sun. They made thick slabs of beach rock and used them to build stone walls. After a few months, they had constructed an entire hamlet made entirely from coral, water, and sunlight. They hadn't just slapped it together either, their construction was precise. Going as far as to position the windows of the buildings out of the typical path of the wind to counteract the typhoons that regularly battered the island. These pseudo-buildings also had kitchen areas, complete with rudimentary utensils fashioned from materials salvaged from the shipwreck or found on the island, including copper pots that showed evidence of being repaired multiple times over the years. Now, it's fair to say that the lost slaves of Tromelin Island were handed a bad card in the deck of life. Already taken as slaves by a colonial power, they were then marooned on a strange island with no natural resources, no shelter, and no means of escape. Their only means of escape, the boat that the crew constructed 2 months after landing, disappeared and abandoned them. Then they were ignored by the same colonial power that saw them marooned in the first place for no less than 15 years. So yeah, they didn't have the best time, to put it lightly. But what the archaeological evidence shows is that these were men and women who didn't quit. In fact, I don't think I've ever read a story that shows more tenacity, more strength, and more ingenuity in the face of hardship. The fact that not 1 but 7 of them survived on this barren hellscape for 15 years is probably one of the greatest stories of human endurance and willpower of all time. So I think the least that we can do is remember and retell their remarkable story. Thanks for watching. Just a quick word to say that I couldn't make these videos without the support of my Patreon members. Consider joining the exclusive 42 Discord community by supporting me on Patreon. It's a great place to discuss my videos with like-minded individuals and myself. The link's in the description, but if you don't want to, or you can't join my Patreon, then please don't worry. A simple like or comment to say thanks would also put a huge smile on my face. Thank you.